Good afternoon. I'm Joel Wiggins with the GMA Government Relations team. And on behalf of the entire team at GMA, thank you to the more than 400 registered local government leaders for taking the time to be with us today. One of the most important roles of local governments is to analyze revenues and operate on a balanced budget. This function becomes much more difficult in times of economic uncertainty, and even more so in the unprecedented times we find ourselves in as we deal with the global pandemic of COVID-19. Today, we have an in-depth program scheduled for you that will feature some step-by-step tips and guidelines for budgeting and analyzing revenues in a time of crisis by Kay Love of the GMA staff. We have a panel of decorated city managers that will be moderated by Mayor Matt Seal of the great city of Ocilla. And first, we'll start things off with the Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Revenue, David Curry. Keep in mind all materials, including today's PowerPoint presentation and additional resources, will be available on the GMA website within a few days. If you have questions for our panelists in the last segment of our program, please utilize the chat feature, and Mayor Matt will get to as many of your questions as time permits. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Commissioner Curry for many years. He has been serving as the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue since May of 2019, but he has a great deal of experience with local government revenues from his over 10 years experience as the Henry County Tax Commissioner. He's always been a pleasure to work with on all revenue-related issues, and we're excited to have him with us this afternoon. Thank you for your time, Commissioner, and without further ado, I will turn it over to you to discuss how the department has dealt with the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate y'all allowing me to be a part of your group today. I've turned my video off, and like so many of us, we're starting to move toward new technology to have these meetings. At the Department of Revenue, we certainly use a version of this. It's not Zoom, but something else. The reason I'm turning the video off is so my audio comes through clear. Sometimes if the audio and video work together, it disrupts the delivery of the message. So hope you'll forgive me for turning the video off, but we do have some updates from the Department of Revenue. Many of you have heard that the April 15th deadlines, the income tax deadlines, has been extended. Well, Georgia did extend those until the July 15th date. This also applies to any fiscal year income tax matters. Everything was pushed off to July 15th, including first quarter, second quarter payments, corporate income tax, things of that nature. With respect to penalties and interest, we also agreed that it would be best to waive any penalties and interest through that July 15th date. One of the things that we do at the Department of Revenue that we implemented in Henry County, when I first got elected in 2008, Henry County is a bedroom community. I don't know how many are familiar with Henry County, but I was born and raised here. It was a bedroom community. It's a rooftop community. It's roughly 30 miles south of Atlanta, and we didn't have a lot of industry. We had a lot of subdivisions. As we began to grow, we probably didn't keep a close look on our digest with respect to having a balanced digest. We had more rooftops and we had commercial and industry. So when the real estate collapse hit in 07, 08, 09, it really hit Henry County hard. It hit several communities in Georgia hard, but it certainly hit Henry County hard as well. One of the things that I learned was when individuals became delinquent on their taxes, oftentimes it was something that was embarrassing to them. This was the first time they had struggled with something like this. So what we decided to do, instead of going after them, which we had the legal authority to do, we would send letters and make phone calls, and we would invite them into the office, and we would ask them to participate in a voluntary payment plan. And that's something we're doing at the Department of Revenue. We call it an installment payment plan, or OIC, an offer in compromise. Instead of putting your thumb on the taxpayer and forcing them to come in, we try to work with them as a partner. Look, none of us like paying taxes. I certainly don't like paying taxes any more than anyone else, but it's a tax. If you have a tax liability, you know you owe it. We try to provide that excellent customer service to encourage people to come in, sit down, talk to us. And while this may not be the most ideal conversation to have, we try to let them know that we're going to be partners with them through this process. And if they'll work with us, we'll work with them. What we've done with those IPAs, those installment payment arrangements, we have we suspended those. We've told the taxpayer, look, if you're under an IPA, let's suspend these till July 15th. Let's see where this economy goes. Let's stay in communication. Once we get back on our feet, and this is a term that I used in front of the Board of Commissioners back in 2010 or 11 when I asked to be able to do this, I said, the sun's going to shine again. It may not be tomorrow, but we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. We got through the economic collapse of 08, 09, but we're going to get through this. This is just a bump in the road. But why don't we work together so we can not put too much pressure on one individual. And then again, after COVID-19 is over, or we get to a more new norm, then we can start implementing those payment arrangements. So that's one of the things we implemented, Department of Revenue, was suspending the monthly payments for the IPAs. Just to give you a snapshot, individual and corporations are taking advantage of the extension through July. Through April 26th, there's been over 640,000 less individual returns processed at the center. That's also 588,000 less individual returns, as well as 15,000 less corporate returns. What that equates to is less revenue. We feel like those that filed their returns early will probably do a refund. Those that owe are probably not filed yet. The March financials for the governor's press release, now keep in mind when we publish the March financials, it's actually reporting February sales. But the state of Georgia net overall tax collections for March totaled $1.83 billion. Well, that's an increase of $163.5 million, or roughly 10% over March of 19. And this is the sad part about it. March 1st, we were on track to have historical high revenues for the state of Georgia, higher than any year in the state of Georgia. And then COVID hit. As you all are experiencing locally, now we see that incredible year is going to end up not so incredible. But the individual tax income, tax collections are for that month, March, which again reported February, was $971.4 million, which increased of about $197.5 million, which is about a 25.5% increase. Corporate income tax, it increased roughly $0.9 million, or 8%, or excuse me, 0.8%. Motor fuel taxes, as you can possibly imagine, it's $5.8 million, or a 4.1% increase. We expect that to be down in April, as well as May, June, July. These numbers come in for the stay-at-home orders. People are just not on the road as much. People teleworking. Motor vehicle tag title fees, they fell $2.5 million, or roughly about 7%. TAVIT, which is something I'm sure all of you are interested in, decreased by $14.6 million, or nearly 23%. Also impact due to stay-at-home orders and some tax commissioner offices being closed and not processing those related transactions. We have a meeting yesterday with motor vehicle director. We feel like we probably need to extend. This is not coming from the governor. This is just an internal conversation that the revenue commissioner had with his staff through communications with tax commissioners. We feel like the extension probably needs to go out a little further past May 15th, and maybe do a staggered reimplementation of these decals being renewed. We don't want all this bottleneck of traffic to come into a tax commissioner's office when they're trying to limit their opening. When they're staging and phasing in their opening hours, we don't need 6 weeks worth of expired tags coming in at one time. So we're trying to look at how best to serve the citizens and the taxpayers and the tax commissioner's offices. So we're going to continue to look at that and give our advice to the governor and see which direction he wants to go. Sales and use tax. Gross sales and use tax collections totaled $936 million during the month, for a decrease of $10.5 million, or about 1.1%. Now remember, these are March numbers of sales tax, and these are remitted in the rear, 20th of the following month. Through January 29th, reported sales tax is off 10%. Again, COVID hit. Some businesses were still operating, some closed throughout that month of March. So that's what was reported in April. Overall, through April 29th, the report for month's April net revenue is trending down about 35%. Again, primarily due to the shift of income tax payments from April to July. And that COVID-19 is going to have a huge impact to our state economy. Roughly 85%, this is going to give you an update of what we're doing in the Department of Revenue. Roughly 85% of our staff are teleworking. While this has been a learning experience, many of us rather not gone through, we expect to learn from it and not make it a wasted experience. If you'd told me 3 months ago that 85% of our workforce would be teleworking, I wouldn't have believed you. But we've seen an increase in productivity, increase in our productivity at our call centers, our processing, and we hope that we can utilize these new discoveries when we get back to our new norm. Like many other agencies and organizations, we've adopted new ways to hold daily briefings just like this. Department of Revenue, I hold a 9 o'clock daily briefing through Microsoft Teams with senior leadership. And we discuss the latest COVID-19 news and activities. Try to get everybody up to speed. We give everyone an opportunity to communicate what they're seeing in their division and their workers, especially when you telework so many people. Department of Revenue has over 1,000 employees. So when you have 85% teleworking, sometimes it's hard to have a feel and understanding what everyone is going through and what everyone is seeing. So I think it's extremely important when you have such a high number of people teleworking to communicate regularly, and that's what we're doing. And certainly my personal goal to keep everybody informed as we navigate this new norm. One of the things we've noticed is the empty floor space. I'm on that 15th floor at Century Center. We have typically 3 to 4 people on the floor these days. I go in every day. Typically that floor holds about 30 people. If we are successful and we can allow more people to telework, we're going to shrink our footprint at Century Center, as well as South Meadow and our regional offices. If we don't need the floor space, that's money we give back to the state. That's money that goes back to Treasury. So that is my overall goal here, is how much floor space can we give back? At Century Center, it costs us $330,000 per floor. We occupy 14 floors. We've already told in our budget reductions, we're going to give back 2 floors. We had a discussion yesterday with state properties. If we can find the right fit, we're willing to give back 3 or 4 more floors, shrink our footprint, but we've got to have the right partner considering we deal with taxpayer information. But this is one of the things that I'm sure many of you are dealing with right now. You're discovering new ways of doing business. I certainly, a year ago when I came on board at Department of Revenue, I think next week will be my 1-year anniversary. I didn't expect this. We launched Drives, which replaced Gratis, the old mainframe system that registered motor vehicles. It's been online for 20 years. We replaced it with Drives, which is a web-based platform. We went down Memorial Day weekend, we launched, and that had a few wrinkles. Anything that large, you're going to have a few hiccups, and we did. We will work through those. I didn't expect to go through a budget reduction of 4% and 6%, but we were asked to do so, and it ended up impacting our agency about 6% and 8%. And now we're dealing with this. I laugh and kid with my staff sometimes. I said, I'm ready for a new norm. I don't know what normal Department of Revenue is, but I'm ready to experience it. It seems like every time we go through one storm or get out of one storm, we're headed into another one. Well, with that being said, Joel, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to give you an update. I'll leave you with this. As we continue to look at the numbers, this is my personal opinion. I think we're going to continue to see a downward trend in revenues to probably midsummer, at least till people get comfortable getting back out in the public and visiting their local businesses. I own 3 small businesses. We closed for a month because our employees felt nervous. There was a lot of misinformation out there about what COVID-19 is and what you can do to keep yourself safe. We're going to open back up. 2 of the businesses will open up tomorrow. The 3rd will open up next Tuesday. But we expect a slow transition back to whatever our new normal is going to be. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I hope all your cities and counties are doing wonderful. If you ever need me, Joel, I've given you my cell phone number, and I'm going to give it here. So if you're listening here, get your pen and paper out, because I want you to have it. I want to be a suspect. I want to be a friend to GMA. I want to be a friend to the taxpayers of Georgia. I want to be helpful to you. If you have questions, if I didn't go over something today that you would like to know more information about, I encourage you to reach out through email or give me a call or a text, and I'll be happy to get you information if I can. But my personal cell phone number is 678-672-7456. 678-672-7456. I encourage you to either reach out to me or go through Joel. Joel and I have a great relationship. I try to be responsive when you ask questions. You've got a great representative in Joel. But again, to wrap up here, I expect revenues to continue to decrease. We're about 40% off overall, and I expect those to continue to decrease to the fiscal year 20 and maybe July 15th. When we have that income tax revenue coming in, it'll start of a new and better year for us.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kay Love on the GMA staff, and happy to be here with you today on the webinar, and appreciate the Commissioner's remarks as we move into the PowerPoint presentation. Every day in the headlines, we are seeing news about COVID-19 and the impact that it may have on us. And the truth of the matter is no one really knows what the impact is going to be. Many of you are already in the middle of your budget process and trying to figure out what that looks like. There have been some preliminary studies. We've heard some comments from the Commissioner, but for every city, it's going to be different. One thing that we do know is that hard decisions will have to be made, and cities will be faced with really, really tough decisions. And information is going to be really important as you move through that process. Early snapshot survey was done with 90 cities responding. 63 of those had 5,000 or less residents. 78 of those responding told us that they expected a revenue shortfall between March and December of this year. 52 of the 78 expected that shortfall to be 10% or more of their annual budget. 77 of the 90 cities gave us a reason for what they expected due to the shortfalls. 44 said that they believe that the shortfalls would be as a result of decline in revenues. 31 of the cities said they expected that shortfall to be as a result of revenue decline and expenditure increase. It's always important to take a look at fiscal year-end analysis and plan the budget calendar out, but it's even more important in times like this with COVID-19 and financial challenges to do so. As I mentioned before, many of you are already deep into your budget process, and one of the things you don't have is data. You don't have revenue numbers yet for some of your revenue sources that you expect to be impacted. So you're moving blindly somewhat through the process. You have a July 1 fiscal year begin date. For those of you that have a calendar year fiscal year, you do have a better advantage of being able to get some data and information under your belt before you have to begin making some of those tough decisions. We're going to talk about some of the tools that you may implement during the process that may be helpful to your cities. One of these is a budget projection model. These have been posted within the Zoom meeting, as well as you got a link for that, and they'll be posted on the GMA website as well. This is an illustration of the model. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and you can take a look at it on your own. But just to orient you, the top of the page, there's a disclaimer. Obviously, we can't assure the accuracy or applicability of the calculations made using the model. We just hope that you'll use the model and how it best works for your city and taking care of the information being entered into the model. Maybe a good idea to save a template as a master. So in the event any of the formulas get overwritten, you can go back in and start over. The top part of the spreadsheet here, these cells are calculated for you as you put information in the spreadsheet. Column B, this column is the uniform chart of accounts for local governments, and you can revise this as it fits your city. Column C is where you would enter your 2020 adopted budget, your current year's budget. And then column D, where the blue arrow is going to be your working draft, what you're working with for this budget cycle. If you want to start off this budget cycle with your current year budget, you just populate column D here with the information in column C. If you don't want to start with your current budget, then that would be all zeros. Then there's an area, 3 columns for scenarios 1, 2, and 3, for you to calculate what if scenarios for different changes for different line items in your budget. You don't have to use all of them. You can use just one of them if that's what you prefer. So here, for example, if we wanted to see what a 10% decrease in real property taxes would result in, then we would put -10 in the field in column E, and then the results would show an adjusted 1 here. Likewise, if we put a percentage in column F in scenario 2, the result would be displayed in adjusted 2 column. In scenario 3, the same way. Then if we want to see what the dollar impact of that 10% reduction is, that's in column M, and we'd see that that's a reduction of $370,500. This box in column M is a drop-down box. You would just select the scenario 1, 2, or 3 to see the impact. All of the results of a deficit or a surplus are displayed right here, and then you can see the percentage change. On the Excel spreadsheet, there is an instructions tab. You have the populated data as well as a blank spreadsheet to work with. We've identified a number of things that we think that you should consider as you move through the process, and we're going to talk about those now. First, the cash is king strategy. GFOA has a helpful Fiscal First Aid Resource Center on their website that you can access later, and the link is provided to you. But the premise of the cash is king strategy is that we should slow outflows of cash and speed up the inflows of cash in order to maintain a balanced budget. And that may look like slowing outflows of cash is reducing expenditures. You may delay purchases, you may make cuts in specific areas. Speeding up inflows, you would look at accounts receivable balances, your collection rate, number of delinquent utility accounts, ways that you can get money in the door sooner, looking at your billing cycle, and then finding new resources, things that you may not have thought about before, or perhaps ways to bring in additional cash. You may look at restructuring some of your debt as a way to bring in cash if that's an option, or cash in some of your investments. You have to be mindful that there could be penalties for those, so you have to look at what provisions are within those. And then the minute you start seeing any type of fiscal or financial stress, implementing this strategy very quickly. So why should you create a cash flow spreadsheet? Well, it's a tool that will give you a 12-month rolling look at your liquidity and where there may be areas of concern or things that you need to focus on. And you can pinpoint those and look at the trends. It's a good idea to have a cash flow spreadsheet done for the previous year so you have a point of comparison. If you don't have that, then start building that now. You can create multiple scenarios and then save those in separate files. GFOA has some helpful best practices on their website that you can take a look at as well. We've created a cash flow model for you. That's another Excel spreadsheet that you have. There is an instruction tab on that as well. To orient you to this spreadsheet, there's the same disclaimer up at the top. We start with the green arrow there with starting cash balance. That's the cash balance on your reconciled bank statement. Not your bank statement balance, but the reconciled to take into account deposits in transit or any checks that have not cleared the bank or other transactions that haven't occurred yet. That's the starting number. Then in the yellow box, that's what month you want to start with. In this example, we started with January. If your fiscal year starts in July, you could start with July, or you could start it on May 1, whatever you'd like to. Whatever month you put in this box, then the corresponding months across the top will change related to that. And then next, if you choose, you can put in a cash minimum balance alert. You don't have to. Here in this example, we've chosen $50,000. So in the event that our cash balance falls between $0 and $50,000, the cash on hand end of month line down here, the cells would be highlighted in yellow. If it's a negative cash balance, it's going to be in red. You don't have to use that feature, but you can. And the blue arrow here in this column would allow you to put in your budget, your annualized amount. So this report could also serve as a budget to actual as you move through the year to see how the comparison looks month over month. Then the 12 columns across will be totaled at the far right where you see the gold arrow, and you can look and see that number change throughout the year. Associated with the model are charts so that you can see what the cash on hand impact looks like. Top one, we have a good one where in no month do we fall below zero cash. Then we have bad where we have some months that we're falling below zero, and then we have an ugly one. There's certainly one we all hope we don't have to deal with, but where there are a number of months that have less than zero cash. Just because there's a positive or a negative number does not indicate the degree of financial stress your city may be under. You have to dig a little deeper. Just because that first chart shows good and that we don't have any months where we're expecting a zero cash balance or below, we may be just one payroll from financial strife. So it's important to dig in and be ultra conservative and looking at the worst case scenario and managing everything in between. Anticipate that revenues will be lower and expenditures will be higher. Identifying one-time events, for example, a revenue that you have this year, like a grant that you may not get next year, or an expenditure. Perhaps you bought some laptops or a piece of equipment. Backing those out of the projection so that you have good information. Then taking a look at your must-do versus nice-to-do, reviewing the current budget and actually identifying those spendings. And then asking, why do we do this? Should we even continue to do this? And considering the policy implications of making any changes at all. In discretionary spending, everything should be fair game for looking at cutting and should be thoughtfully considered as you move through that. If you know and identify your city's financial triggers, then it will help you proactively plan to maintain a balanced budget. Identify and recognize those early. For example, if sales tax revenues are decreasing, you have an increase in delinquent utility accounts, your accounts receivable balances are increasing, or personnel expenses are rising. Knowing what steps you're going to implement when those triggers present themselves. A hiring freeze, perhaps, early retirement program, deferring capital projects, whatever that might be for your city. You may be doing some internal borrowing between funds that have more cash than others. We suggest you develop 3 scenarios. We call them the good, the bad, the ugly. You can call them whatever you like. Start with the worst case scenario first and then work your way backwards and plan out each scenario to know what steps need to be in place in the event they need to be implemented. All scenarios should be thoroughly discussed and vetted, and there should be consensus on the governing body related to what course of action is going to be taken in each scenario so that staff are in a position to nimbly implement that when and if each scenario presents itself. Before making any decisions, the financial and political impacts of each should be discussed. The best financial decisions are not the best political decisions and vice versa. Be aware of any unintended consequences that may come into play related to personnel decisions and employee benefits decisions. If you're going to implement a hiring freeze, then who's going to do the work if you're not able to fill those positions, and what level of service delivery may be impacted? If you're able, prepare a cost-benefit analysis for each scenario so that you can provide good data so that well-informed decisions can be made as opposed to emotional decisions. And using that data to help the governing body make those very, very tough decisions that we know that will have to be made and sometimes are not favorable in the eye of the public. Everybody's a Monday morning quarterback. So there'll be tough decisions that made, and they should be data-driven. Communication, we can't stress the importance of that enough, of everyone knowing the true financial situation of the city, citizens, staff, the governing body, and being candid and transparent with that, sharing information across every platform that you have available to you, whether that's social media, your website, posting it in City Hall, and updating the plan as you go. We know you're putting out fires every day and it changes from morning until lunchtime. So it's important to set the expectation of when the city's going to report out. You can't report out every minute, but there are times that you can report out and update the plan because we know it will change. And helping people understand that in a time of uncertainty, this is a best guess snapshot that you have provided. And it will change, and it is subject to change along the way multiple times perhaps. And getting that buy-in and understanding, not only from citizens and staff and the governing body, will help everyone work as a team to implement those very tough decisions and the changes that have to come as a result of that. Related to revenue projection process, we've identified 6 steps that you might want to think about. Know your city's revenue pie is really important. Do you have just one big piece of pie? You have many small pieces? What percentage of your total budget does that make up? How might some of these revenue sources be impacted by the economy, and by what amount? For example, sales tax, property taxes, anything related to hospitality and tourism industry, we know will be hit hard. Franchise fees, court fines, all of those, it's important to know the makeup of that pie. And then looking at historical trends. If you have 2008, 2009 data from the recession, Look at that. What actions did you take? How might that apply now? If you don't have historical data, start building it now, because another crisis will happen and you'll have that. Then focus on those revenue sources that are most impacted by an economic event. And identify new revenue sources with your team. Brainstorm. Go down the chart of accounts and see which revenue sources may be there that you haven't taken advantage of. How long has it been since you realigned charges and fees with the cost of delivering that service? And are there any services that your city may be providing that you aren't charging for currently? Short-term borrowing will probably be a tool that a lot of cities will wind up using during this time, considering a tax anticipation note or a revenue anticipation note. This is short-term debt, and it has to be repaid. It's not new money, but it's a great cash flow tool to be used. It does require authorization by the governing body, and there are state regulations related to the amount that you can borrow and when you have to pay that back. So consult your legal and financial professionals to determine what your options are. This is also a good spot to take a look at restructuring existing debt if that is an option for your city. Identify any available relief funds that you can take advantage of, whether it's CARES Act, FEMA, GMA, Department of Justice, grants. Documentation is critical with this. You should keep information about those expenditures separately so that you can quickly and easily provide them to the grantor and ask before you spend. You may spend money where that is not an eligible reimbursement and the city would have to absorb that cost. It's always important to review the city's reserve policy every year during the budget process. It's imperative during times like these to do that. Do you have a reserve policy, also known as fund balance? If not, then you need to get one in place. Does your current reserve policy provide flexibility for you to be able to manage during this financial crisis and not violate the policy? GFOA has a sample policy guidelines that you can take a look at, and GMA has a publication as well that has a section on fund balance policy. We've identified 10 steps for the expenditure projection process. We've talked a little bit already about mandatory versus discretionary expenses. We're making a list literally of these and understanding why. Is this expense required by state law, federal law, your charter, local ordinances, agreements, consent order? And then reviewing levels of service to determine if it's desirable and or feasible to make adjustments one way or another in that. Are there viable cost cutting options? And then looking at what may be discretionary. We all know what's discretionary is always a really small amount compared to all those things that are mandatory in the budget. It is ever more important to update those current year estimates. Making projections using the most current budget to actual is imperative. And as you're getting new information about these revenue sources that may be impacted by the economy, it's important to refresh those and revisit assumptions, your vacancy rate, your economic indicators that you're using, whether it's CPI or another one, transfers, cost allocation, and analyzing it not only holistically, but by department and by program so that you can identify potential cost savings or surpluses, and then determining in a very practical way what departments actually need to operate for the remainder of the fiscal year. And everybody has to abandon that use it or lose it mentality. Engaging staff early on in the process is really important, and getting their input and their buy-in, allowing them to think unconstrained about potential options and choices. And the people who are delivering the services on the front line are in a very unique position to offer some ideas for scenarios that may be viable for you. And then always consider the impact on operations. Capital is always a good place to look related to freeing up some cash. Perhaps you're in a position to defer some of those purchases, but looking at the cost benefit as well as, are you incurring more future maintenance costs by deferring that purchase? You have to weigh and strike a balance with that, and analyzing where the funds are coming from. If your funds are coming from general funds by capital, will you have as much as you thought you were going to have? Are there grants that you're leveraging that you may lose if you don't go ahead and make that purchase? And then always looking for opportunities to reduce scope, change scope, transition, phase in parts of the project to still keep working on some of those very critical projects that the public expects to see. Identifying annualized expenditures is an important step in the process. Sometimes this can get us in that we might have made a change during the middle of the year, mid-year, and we haven't annualized that for the 12-month period for the upcoming budget process. Whether that's a personnel change, maybe we added a new position, we gave a pay raise mid-year, or an operating cost for a new facility we may be bringing online. It's important to know what that annualized financial impact is. A companion to that is material changes. related to service levels or anything that you have changed, and just providing a checklist throughout the year of the impact on payroll and benefits and liabilities. Did you create a new department? Did you eliminate a department? Did you change a service level and adjusting the budget accordingly? It is time to take a very deep dive into employee benefits and knowing what those truly cost you and striking the balance between what the employer pays and what the employee pays, and identifying any needed plan change that may be put into place this year. It's important to know when renewal dates are for your benefits because they don't always align with your fiscal year. Then developing policies around those plan design changes and setting expectations very early with staff, governing body, and the public, and considering what the financial market impact may be on items such as your required contribution to pension plans. And then requesting early on from your benefits providers estimates of what they anticipate a premium change may be. There's always an opportunity to identify cost savings and efficiencies, and taking a look at energy efficiency policies that you may have on your books right now, but you haven't fully implemented. And analyzing operational process, using things like Six Sigma and ways to refine process to become more efficient. And then always looking to identify conservation opportunities that you may not have taken advantage of before. Analyzing contracts and agreements is an important part of these steps as well. Looking for options at renewal time, knowing when your contracts come up for renewal. Do they all come at one time? Are they spread out? And exploring options where you may renegotiate terms for existing contracts. There's nothing wrong with asking. All they can do is tell you no. You may identify some goods and services in this process where you don't typically bid them out. You may not be required to, but you may want to issue a bid or an RFP to get more competitive pricing. And always take advantage of vendor discounts that are offered. If your vendor or supplier doesn't offer a discount, then ask about the possibility of getting that. And planning for the future. Right now, we know you are putting out the fire of the day, and you have to be looking at today, but always have your eye on the future to create a plan to address a range of outcomes. And many cities will probably, if they are lucky enough to have reserves on their books, they're going to be using them to bridge that gap for next year's budget. So a plan needs to be put in place of how are you going to build back up those reserves to your policy or to the place where they need to be, because there will be another financial situation that comes that you'll have to take that into account. And then adopting your financial policies to support those and putting mechanisms in place for that ongoing look-see. We've identified a few best practices. We know that most of you employ those already. Here's 6 priority ones that we've identified. Communicate the city's financial condition to all. Pick low-hanging fruit. Have successes. Celebrate those successes. Take advantage of resources. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There are many, many resources available to you. Explore all the options and those impacts before making final decisions. Data integrity and trend analysis is critical for the governing body to make well-informed decisions. And those decisions should be tied to service levels. In conclusion, remember the 5 Ps. Policy, projections, people, performance, and prevention. Got to have policies in place to begin with. Make projections based upon those policies. Utilize the people to implement those and to create successes through those projections. Measure performance. If you don't know what you're measuring, how do you know when you're successful? And then putting things in place to prevent underperforming in the future if there are areas where you haven't performed where you felt like you should have. And then always reviewing those policies. Here is your member services consulting team. You have a wealth of knowledge and information available to you as a resource. They respond to you, email, phone. They are staffed by district. GMA also has a number of services and programs available to you to help with revenue enhancement, efficiencies, financing. Call on these folks. They're your lifeline. Here's a number of other resources that you can take a look at later. And with that, I am going to kick it to Mayor Matt Seal.
Thanks, Kay. This is Mayor Matt Seal from the great city of Osceola. I've been asked to facilitate a panel discussion with 3 people that know a lot more than me. I think I was asked this for 2 reasons. First of all, GMA sponsors a podcast I do called Small Town Podcast. That was my shameless plug, so you guys all check it out. So I'm used to asking questions and then getting some really good answers from some really talented people. And the second reason, I think, is because as an elected official, as a local government leader, I'm about to have to make some difficult decisions that I may not be as prepared as I'd like to be. And so I'm going to be asking some questions of some people that know more than me. And I think nobody at GMA pitched it that way to me, but certainly I think that's appropriate for us as elected leaders to make sure we're relying on the knowledge and the experience of those who've done the job a lot longer and a lot better than we have. So I've got a few kind of housekeeping issues before we introduce our three panelists and then get into some questions. I've got some prepared questions for them. But then also we're going to have a section after that where I can take questions from anybody on the webinar, on the call. So if you're on Zoom, you can use your chat box there. You can either do those questions privately to me, and I've got my box open so I can read them as they come in, or you can just do them for everyone, and that's fine too. And I'll see those as well. If you'd like to ask your question to a specific one of our panelists, please make sure to notate that in the question as well. Otherwise, if I get overwhelmed with questions, I'll probably just ask that question of just one of the three. And if we only have a few questions, then I can, of course, get input from all three of them for each question. But to make sure, if you've got someone specific you want to ask your question of, if you'll make sure to note that when you put that in the chat. One question that we kind of anticipated on this that I want to go ahead and kind of give some information and front run is funding to local governments and some of the legislation that's either been passed already or is being discussed. So I actually spoke with Joel Wiggins before we got on this webinar. I've got some notes from our conversation that I want to put out to everybody. And then we'll just kind of, we won't be taking questions about that because there's just too many variables on that. So many of you already know that the CARES Act that was recently passed set aside $150 billion into the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or called CRF, that went to all 50 states and any local government that had a population of 500,000 people or more. So the state of Georgia in that received just over $5.1 billion overall from the CRF funds, and it can share up to 45% of that with local governments. So because of having populations of that 500,000 people or more, 4 counties, that's Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, and Gwinnett, and then also the city of Atlanta have already received some direct funding from that in the amount of over $600 million. And that leaves the possibility for Governor Kemp to share over $1.2 billion with the rest of local governments in the state. So GMA and ACCG, their capable staffs, are already talking in cooperation with the governor's office. And these are supposed to cover expenses due to COVID-19 impacts. So the governor's office has asked ACC and GMA, well, what those expenses look like. So you will be getting some surveys very soon from GMA staffers. And if you are interested, as I'm sure many of you are, in possibly receiving some of those funds, please turn that survey right back around. Make sure you fill it out as detailed as possible because our GMA staff is incredible. But what they need from us is accurate information and as much of it as possible to enter into these discussions. So that's just a little bit of information. There's a lot of other legislation that's kind of in the conceptual phase, but it's not enough to talk about beyond what I just put out. So I won't be taking any questions about funding directly to local governments as part of this discussion. All right, now that I've taken care of the housekeeping issues, let's get on to our guests. I've got 3 folks who help manage our cities. I'm going to introduce them. And as I introduce you 3 guys, if you'll go ahead and unmute, if you're not already unmuted, say hello. And then I'd like you to say roughly the population of your city that you help manage, just to give everyone a little bit of context there. Our first panelist is Brian Lackey, who is currently the city manager in the city of Gainesville. So Brian, say hey and tell us roughly the population of Gainesville.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be with you today. So in Gainesville, there are roughly 42,000 residents here, and it's a beautiful day in Gainesville.
All right. All right. Thanks for joining us. Our next panelist is Brian Boltice, and he is the city manager in the city of Ackworth. Brian, say hey and tell us how big Ackworth is.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Boltice. In the city of Ackworth, we've got about 24,000 people.
And heretofore, both of those gentlemen will be known as Gainesville Brian and Ackworth Brian, just to keep them apart. We already rehearsed that beforehand. So, and our third panelist representing the smaller towns is Mr. Artie Thrift. He is the city administrator in the city of Rennes. So Artie, say hey and tell us how big Rennes is.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. City of Rennes is 2,400 people.
All right. Thank all three of you for joining us and sharing. These are some tough questions, and I'm sure we're going to get some tougher ones from the folks on the webinar right now. You'll be unprepared for, but I'm sure we'll do just fine and give us some great information. So my first question is just going to be, and we'll go around to everybody. So we'll start with Gainesville, Brian. But the question is, based on what you guys know today, what impact will COVID-19 have on your city's financial condition? Just kind of an overview so far. So Gainesville, Brian.
Well, thanks, Matt. Again, I appreciate the chance to be a part of the panel, not only to participate, but also to learn from the other panelists and the other questions that get asked. So for the impacts for Gainesville, I'm sure it's similar to everyone else on the call. We're going to see some significant revenue cuts. As Kay mentioned, we're starting to look at our projections and trying to do a very conservative, I wouldn't say worst case, because I do believe worst case is a Great Depression scenario, and then you get into a different type of budgeting from there. But assuming a very conservative type impact, we are looking at significant revenue cuts across the board. The one exception to that is our property taxes. We're fortunate that our digest in January, that snapshot was up a little bit. Obviously, our revenues there are going to depend on appraisals and collections and how that goes later in the year. But we're really going to anticipate seeing significant losses in our loss program, local option sales tax, business license revenue, TAVT, and our franchise fees. We feel our partners in the utility space will probably tell us that they're seeing some revenue losses there. So those are not only our biggest percentage losses, they're also our biggest dollar losses there. But as Kay mentioned, that's for our next fiscal year. As Kay mentioned, you really need to look out to the next fiscal year, 2 in a row, because while we are seeing some significant revenue losses next year, I mentioned our property taxes should be up a little bit. Well, for the next year, when we get this time next year, when you start seeing reassessments and appeals, that's where we see our significant hit happening with that, and we need to adjust for that. If we were just to go 1 year at a time, which would be a bit foolish, and just go from there, our cuts probably wouldn't have to be near as significant as what we're looking at to accomplish 2 years of that. Now, we're a pretty lean organization when we look at it, but really over 8 years of economic expansion, there are some things that you tend to and can cut back on as you move forward. So what we've done through our budget process, we're a July fiscal year, so we ordinarily at this point in time, moving into May, we're pretty close to putting the finishing touches on our budget with council. But about a month ago, we scrapped that, went back to our department heads and say, hey, you're going to start with this current year fiscal budget. We're going to start from there, look at where you can cut. Now, outside of personnel, that's not a whole lot. So as of right now, we're not anticipate having to go through personnel cuts, which then that puts us into our capital program. That's going to be where most of the sacrifices and cuts happen. As we've talked to many others on the warm-up call for this, and I'm sure many of you have looked at this, the paving and resurfacing always seems to be the first casualty of a downturn, and that'll be the case here in Gainesville. Past 4 to 5 years, we paved a lot of streets, resurfaced a lot of streets, and I'm already setting the stage with my council to understand that we all know that which streets get paved and when can be a little bit of a political football in any city, and so I'm trying to set the stage that there won't be a lot of street resurfacing over the last 2 years. Also taking a look at the other capital projects Kay mentioned. We have a couple of streetscaping projects that are going to be delayed out. And any of our facility renovations that we try to anticipate for the next couple of years, those are going to be pushed out. We're going to patch and repair things as we need it to move forward. So that's on the surface what we're looking at to get through the next 2 fiscal years in Gainesville.
All right, thanks, Brian. And now Ackworth, Brian, tell us kind of what the overview is there too. And I'll go ahead because I was going to ask this anyway. And Gainesville, Brian, just kind of anticipated the question. If there's some things you already know you have to push back, special projects, new programs, expansions, go ahead and address that in this response too.
Thank you. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. What we did is kind of like what Brian was talking about. We had a budget that all my department heads had submitted, and we were starting to review that when the COVID hit. And so what we did is went back, told all the department heads, scrap that budget. Let's look at what we're going to call the COVID budget. Let's look at our revenues. Let's see what's going down. One of the problems that I'm sure everyone's having is, this is still only about 45 days in, and a lot of our revenues come in 60 days after, with SPOS revenues and things like that. So we still haven't even seen what those decreases are going to be, and we're having to make estimated guesses with those. We're seeing our revenues down. We're estimating that. We are doing, again, kind of like what Brian said, we're looking at what can we delay, what can we cut. I've already told employees that we're not looking at any salary adjustments next year, that we're going to hold off on that. But I also want to, tell our employees that we're going to look at this month by month. Just because we're doing a 12-month budget right now, that doesn't mean that's what it's going to be. We're going to examine revenues each month. We're going to examine expenses each month, much more closely than I say we've done in the past, so that we can make more budget amendments as things go on. We also have a lot of recreation programs, and one of the things that we're trying to figure out is what is the new normal. How are we going to operate those? How are we going to operate summer camps? How are we going to operate basketball, baseball and football? All those things that we've done that have just become normals. It's a moving target. We are trying every day to figure out, how that's going to be.
All right, thanks. And Artie Thrift, with a name like that, you were born to lead a small town through its financial turmoil. So go ahead and tell us what you're looking at with the impact there in RINs.
Yeah, thank you. It's a challenge for small towns also, just a different level of a challenge. We're 2,400 people here. So, we're already counting on or projecting or anticipating reductions in revenues along our revenue streams, the local option sales tax and the property tax might run a little slow. Our digest here hasn't been growing. We're in a poor county, as the state of Georgia is looked at. So the overall digest has not been growing. So, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, and we've already made some. We are looking at what the future holds without really knowing what the future holds. So we're kind of throttling back on stuff. We've put some projects on hold, and we'll be meeting and discussing where we go from here. But it's a challenge for small cities, just like it is these larger cities.
Well, Artie, actually, let me just stick with you on that, and because my next question for you is going to be what are the biggest budget concerns that you see that might be common to all of us smaller towns in Georgia?
Capital projects, when you speak capital projects here, you're talking about SPLOST, special purpose local option sales tax. And for us, we're in a TIA county. And so we can't fund capital projects out of our general fund. The money's not there. So we depend on those local option sales tax and TIA. Those revenues are going to decrease, obviously. So capital expansion projects are going to be throttled back or maybe even put on hold. That's just how we see it coming.
All right, let me go back to Gainesville, Brian. Brian, what areas of your city budget do you think will be the most impacted? I know we can kind of look at it as overall, but which parts and how do you plan to address those?
Well, as I mentioned before, it's really going to be a big impact to our general fund through that. And to address what you said about new initiatives, outside of some software and some hardware things we have to do to address some upgrades our 911 center made a couple of years ago that we've already committed to. Really, anything new is going to be drawn back. It's going to be focused on core services. In Gainesville, I consider us a full service city. Outside of gas and electric service, we provide every other service that you can think of to our citizens. So we've got to draw back and think about how we continue to deliver those core services and to lay off any other type of impacts, because again, we have to look back to shrink back outside of personnel. Because we're a full service city, our personnel costs are so high. and to, not have to dip into that. So far, we're fortunate not have to plan for that. So we're really going to be focused on providing those core services as we try to digest those revenue cutbacks.
And Ackworth, Brian, you kind of alluded to some of the changes anyway, but speak a little more to the strategies in as far as the actual budget process that you guys are having to put in place. And more than one of you is talking about doing things month to month, but just any kind of specific tips and strategies you can offer, I'm sure it'll be helpful to everybody.
Well, the thing you got to remember, especially with if you're going to do any adjustments in salary, that the next year you're going to get, that's if you're got a retirement fund, when salaries go up, then your cost for your pensions are going to go up as well.
Domino effect there.
Yeah, but that's not going to hit for about 8 months, to a year later, because when you do your salary surveys, you see one cost now, but you won't see the other for a while. As Brian talked about, our property taxes this year supposedly are supposed to be going up based on early projections. We've been very fortunate. We've got a great staff, and we've been at about 99% collection rate. But what is that going to be next year? So even though our revenues may be up, what will our collection rate be? I thought the commissioner had some great ideas about the phone calls and things like that and working out payment arrangements. So I did take a note on that one. I thought that was really good. The other thing is we're just sending out business licenses, in the next 30 days. We have given people an extra 30 days to pay those. But again, how many of the businesses are going to reopen? We have no idea. Business license is a huge revenue source for us. And, we're just praying that that stays about the same. But our business licenses are based on gross receipts. So again, it would be on last year's gross receipts, not what's going on right now. So we're not going to see that for another year. So as Brian was talking about earlier, this is not a 1-year thing. This is a 2-year thing when you look at when people report things.
I've got several questions that have come into my chat box, and everyone on the call here, keep those coming. But let me just kind of go around. And I know this is something we're just learning, but any kind of projections I had, let me find the question here. Sharon Dickerson asked, she'd be interested to know if you know the percentage decrease in your sales tax. Everyone mentioned something about lost and splost. And I'm curious for 3 different size cities, what is roughly your revenue in your general fund? What's the percentage of your revenue that you get from sales tax? Because I know that's going to vary. And then also, are you seeing anything? I know the commissioner just gave us a little bit of indication. Have you been able to determine or get a feel for how much that's going down? We'll start with Ackworth, Brian. We'll pick back up with you.
Well, Cobb County is a little bit different. We actually do not have a lost. So we don't have any general fund revenue coming to us from sales tax. So Cobb is one of those very few counties that does that. And in regards to our SPLOST, we're not sure yet. We expect that we'll be getting that first, the 1st of May is when we'll be getting that next check. So if we had this webinar next week, I could tell you what it was down.
Right.
Right now, we don't know because, we're 45 days into it and we haven't seen it. So we're just having to make estimated guesses right now.
Right. All right, Gainesville, Brian.
Yeah, well, we are fortunate to have lost, and as I mentioned, that's going to be a big hit. We were anticipating roughly a 20 to 21% decrease for the next fiscal year, and that's 15% of our general fund budget.
Wow. Okay, Artie.
Yeah, I got my calculator out when you asked that question. So our local option sales tax, it's going to be about 15-20% of our budget also. And I know last month's check was less than every check I got this year. I don't know what that means, but I think next month's check is probably going to be less too. So we'll see how that goes. I anticipate those sales tax revenues to decrease. I know some businesses have been selling a lot of stuff, but some businesses are closed and not operating, But we'll see. I anticipate it being less.
I know the commissioner just gave a report, and of course he had to allude to, and I have a retail business, so I knew this right away. People file on the 20th or up to the 20th for the previous month. So people 10 days ago just filed their sales tax revenues and sent in checks and payments for all of March. And so there's that lag, certainly. So we'll keep that going. This one's, this is from Liz Ordialis up in Hiawassee. Hey, Liz. She was asking if you got how are you guys handling your public hearings? We have to do that part when we do a budget. So that's a little different than the revenue, but it's obviously an important part of how we have to do this process. So have you guys talked about anything creatively, especially if you guys have a budget that's got to be approved before a July 1 fiscal year date? Artie, what are you doing different?
Hey, in terms of council meetings and public hearings, I guess that's what you're asking about.
Well, specifically, the public hearing you have to do one for the budget before you.
That's right. That's right. We actually canceled all our meetings in March. Didn't have any public meetings at the city of Rennes. We're a small country town, and so we had a work session held yesterday. We had our city council all 6 feet apart, social distancing. We set up our meeting room with all the chairs 6 feet apart, social distancing. So that would only allow for about 12 visitors to come into the room. But we had a meeting set up with all the chairs. Before the meeting, we got in there, we sanitized and cleaned everything, and we sanitized all the doorknobs, and we even set up a way to hand out information about what it means to attend one of those meetings, the guidelines. If you have any of these symptoms, fever, cough, you're not allowed in the meeting. So we actually held a physical meeting and treated it as best as we could according to the guidelines and the virus that's out there.
Matt, I'll jump in to say that this shows that you have a large city and a small city that are kind of the same line of thinking. My council's not real keen on virtual meetings. In fact, you see, I got my tile today. The only reason that is we had a work session this morning, and we did the same precautions of social distancing. It was broadcast on Facebook Live. The building was open for anyone to come. We didn't. I think the broadcasting on Facebook Live really helps with that. We'll have our council meeting to follow up from this on Tuesday night, and it'll be the same way. We'll implement social distancing there, be open to the public. We don't have a public hearing item coming up, but as we move into June to hold that, we anticipate holding that the same way. We'll just have to see what the numbers are. Hope by that time our local state of emergency will be done here, so there really won't be any restrictions. That I know some of us are kind of waiting to see what the governor does. It's a fluid process, right? But as right now, we anticipate before the end of June, we'll hold our public hearing on our budget to get it adopted.
And real quick, my council's been really good. We have had our meetings, but they've been by Zoom, and we invite the public to do it. So far, we've had like 2 people that have joined by Zoom. And then we are looking at starting in June, we're going to go back to regular meetings.
Guys, I've got my timer telling me it's about time to wrap it up. We had a couple questions. Joel, I want to see if I can get you to come back in. I know we didn't plan this, but I had a couple of questions in the private chat to me about the information that I kind of gave from your notes on the CARES Act and where that's going. Joel, are you on or able to jump on?
Yes, sir.
They just wanted to know if the notes I read or even more information about that was available somewhere, could be pushed out. And then I had another question about that survey that I want to make sure we answered on this. Who's that going to be sent to? Is that going to be a specific person at the city? Is that just going to be kind of sent out like other things? And then, and Larry already kind of answered this question to everybody. Someone was asking, Jim Elliott was asking about internet sales tax, and it looks like that started up April 1st. So maybe that
Yes.
was make sure you got to speak to that because you'll do it more intelligibly than I will.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for that wonderful panel. And we were going to go ahead and have those internal discussions this week. In fact, I'm probably going to be on the call this afternoon or tomorrow morning about the survey, but it's most likely going to go to city managers, possibly finance directors. But we want to go ahead and get that out as quick as possible. We may even send it to more than one person in each city just to make sure that every city has an opportunity to respond. Also, in regards to the information on the CARES Act and specifics, we are going to keep everyone posted as that moves forward. Like I said, we only have a letter into the governor's office, and we're waiting to hear back from them. So the survey is critical in getting this information to the governor's office so we can get that ball moving forward. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, I think that's supposed to be a wrap for us here. I'm getting the nod from Stephanie, I think. So I just want to thank Artie and Ackworth Brian and Gainesville Brian. Thank you guys for helping out. And I just want to throw in a plug. Guys, everyone that came on here probably already knows this, but GMA has just done an incredible job, and they didn't pay me a dime to say this. I've just been overwhelmed with the efforts and the information that's been put out by all the members of the staff and the various aspects of things they provide us with. So if you're not taking advantage of those resources, that's kind of on you, because they are there. But in addition to those resources, let's make sure we're reaching out to each other. We had three city managers, city administrator for Artie, who were able to answer some questions, but there's a lot of talent in this state. So let's make sure we're doing that networking that GMA helps us do, and just try to pull things together for our cities and for the people who live in it. We're supposed to be stewards of that. And we've got the resources to do a good job. It's going to be tough, but we've got what we need with each other and the resources provided by GMA. So thank you guys, everybody, for putting this together. All I did was turn on my camera and start talking. And I think I'm supposed to send it off unless somebody else had something they wanted to say. Then everybody have a great day. Be healthy, be safe.